Hello, good morning. I would like to thank FIS for the invitation. It's great to be here to exchange information about such an important topic. I would like to thank Mark Zonta. He is a PhD in infectious disease, Federal University. He's a researcher also at Instituto Butantan. He is the director of PhD and translational research at Inside Diagnosis. Let me also thank Alexandre Aldred. He's a physician. He trained in acupuncture and anthroposophy, and they've been partners at Seegene Brazil. So thank you very much for accepting the invitation to talk a little bit about what has been done in recent years here in Brazil when we think about innovation, technology. Before handing it over to you, I have some points to share. A lot has been said about our concern for patients' health status. We talk about taking patients away from hospital, about changing medicine, which had been focused on treatment. So the patient used to come with a symptom, was treated, and never knew what he had. So now we are thinking about well-being and quality of life of our patients. And we are taking a greater stride because now we are going into diagnose-based medicine to a health-based medicine. So what have you been done? How do you see these changes, especially here in Brazil? And what do you see as the impact of the pandemic on these emerging characteristics? Do you think that there have been more changes due to that? I would like to hand it over to Marco, who go first, and then we'll have Alexandre, who is a specialist in anthroposophy. I would like to start and to thank the invitation to be part of this very important event. Let me thank the organizing committee. Thank Guilherme, who is our partner, who asked me to be here. I would like to thank Alexandre for being here with us to talk about health, innovation, and see really where we can go for the diagnosis, for patient screening and follow-up. Guilherme's introduction was instrumental because innovation and technology are here to stay, to solve problems really, but to support, strongly support problem resolution, not only of diagnosis and treatment, but primarily of prevention. I come from a pathology basis, which was macro, then micro, and now it's nano. And we have been getting used to that. More really granting more access to patients. When we think about that, half a decade dealing with new technologies and working with the changes, we can see that innovation is here to stay. The area of lab, genetic sequencing, patients' accessibility, the smaller the sample, the greater the quality of diagnosis. So molecular area is here to stay, and the pandemic has come to show us that things are really turning into reality. When we used to talk about molecular biology, We thought that molecular biology was very far from what we could find, especially outside Brazil. Technologies got here very slowly, and the pandemic has proved that this is something urgent. This is something that we need for immediate resolution. And it gives us a very important point, which is the popularization, so to speak. Well, we go to McDonald's, ask for a snack, and run a COVID PCR because molecular technology is there, high technology is there to solve it. I am also sure that it improves accessibility, not only of clinical labs, but also of the population. It's cheaper, it's easier. Prevention has always been addressed, prevention of disease, early diagnosis. What we used to do, uh, we've always had early diagnosis, no prevention of cancer, but with molecular biology and identification of biomarkers and infectious agents or proteins involved in pathological process, we can finally predict and try to screen the disease even before it affects the subject. This is all associated with artificial intelligence, and we talk a lot about data, and we can obtain data with more objectivity, working and preventing directly anything that might impact people or the environment. Technology provides prevention, early detection, trying to inhibit uh, anything that affects human beings. So these are my initial remarks, and I'll be glad to entertain any further comments or considerations. Thank you. Can I carry on? Can you all hear me? Well, now I'm back. Marco, can you hear us? Yes, we can hear you, Guilherme. I cannot hear you, Marco. I guess Dr. Marco Zonta had a problem in his connection. He is back now. Why don't we move on and ask someone else to speak? Okay, I guess now I'm back. Can you hear us now? What about you, Alexandre? Can you hear me? Maybe you can make comments while Marco is just going on with his connection. I'm fine while Marco is getting reconnected. Thank you very much for FIS team, Seegene, who have really provided the space to talk about innovation and technology for health prevention. I work with thermography as I have my training in anthroposophy. It's an infrared method. We measure the body heat zones, and based on that, we can diagnose and treat diseases. What Guilherme said when we began is really important. We've been dealing with a new paradigm in healthcare, which is the medicine that we have always been practicing based on disease, based on diagnosis. And the medicine of the future is the medicine of health, where we are going to maintain ourselves healthy. We will try not to get sick. Diseases are part of our lives. Traumas are not going to disappear, but chronic disease, infectious disease, we will start making early diagnosis. We will go from diagnosis to detecting dysfunctions before the pathology happens. And this is what I anticipate to have in the future. The pandemic has been a catalyst, it's an enzyme really of changes in society. Medicine is one of the most traditional and conservative areas where we tend to resist to changes. With the pandemic, the changes got much faster. Telemedicine, teleconsultation, things that could not be done before 2019, and we constantly addressed that. I was part of the discussions in the Board of Medicine, but as a result of the pandemic, we experienced huge change. The remote world is here to stay. We have no questions whatsoever. Teleconsultation will remain for a long time. But what has not really keep up with the change is telemonitoring, is tests done remotely. We can see large technology companies such as Apple and Google investing in smart watches, wearables, IoTs, and devices that monitor subjects in a continuous fashion, and they can give us health parameters in real life and real time. As a trend, this is extremely interesting. Everything that we have in terms of technology for people to use from home in their smartphones are things that are really current trends. Zonta pointed out something which I think is really interesting about macropathology, micropathology, now nanotechnology, and I work with thermal pathology. So now we can get between the micro and the energy, the electromagnetic wave of heat that we cannot see. So I'm trying to make a parallel between molecular biology and thermal imaging. And by doing that, we can identify, just to hand it over to back to Zonta, but We made a partnership with Seegene throughout the partnership to identify upper airway infection, COVID and other flu-related syndrome through thermal images correlated with molecular tests, PCR and antigen tests and others, viral panels, training neural networks, artificial intelligence, machine learning. And we've been screening and diagnosing flu-like syndromes and COVID with thermal image associated with PCR. Just to show you that we are speaking about the future, but also the present at research labs and also in some real-life applications to provide that in real life to everyone. Let me also remind you that the Nobel Prize of Medicine this year was for researchers who studied temperature. So they identified a ionic channel that opened due to temperature differences. So Zonta talked about molecular markers, but heat, temperature is also a biomarker. And if you work with thermal, you know that we can see that shown on the screen of our subjects. So thermography, and we can see one step before pathology. Plato used to talk about that. Diseases, to some extent, are manifested through heats. So these were said by the Greeks, and still today, Hippocrates said, if there is excessive heat or cold, the disease will be there to be detected. It's an aphorism, and we use it as a basic everyday guide for modern thermography 2,500 years later. Marco, can you hear us? Marco, are you back there? I'm sorry, I'm oscillating here. I don't know. I apologize. It's real life, isn't it? I just missed what Alexandre said in his last comments, but interacting between process to identify early diseases or to anticipate that is absolutely essential. When you talk about screening and diagnosis, we are not working alone. The more tool we have to detect disease, the better. Especially in an area where we interact, which is breast cancer, image and the confirmation of disease are essential. So I think that the first step and thermography is a wonderful tool in identifying those pathological processes that are happening, identifying important points, and molecular and diagnostic tools really help us differentiate a benign or a malignant disease. So thanks to technology in our favor, medicine and health are not only in the hands of healthcare professionals, it is a multi-professional area, and we need bioinformatics specialists, we need lawyers, we need engineers, we need certifying agencies for everything that we are trying to explain with our science. So multi-professional, and this combo of partnership really provides better quality to our patients. In my area of cervical cancer screening, Of course, we still advocate for pap smear, but before diagnosing any morphological detection, I can rely on a molecular detection, HPV, which is the main agents that cause cervical cancer. So the World Program of Cancer Screening have changed, and now they tell us how to anticipate the detection of any abnormality in tissue. Creating screening programs, primary screening programs are essential to improve quality of life of human beings. Very interesting to hear you. Now, thinking about what we've seen after the pandemic, or once the pandemic's going, if anything positive has come out of it, I think we've got people much more engaged with their health. People are just so much more concerned, much more concerned about their health. We just get access to so much information, but the quality of information is still debatable. I can see people more engaged in taking care of their health, but we need reliable methods and alternatives for people to do it. Health digitalization is extremely interesting. As Alexandre pointed out, telemedicine is a reality, something that's here to stay. People got used to social distancing, of doing things remotely. Before the pandemic, we used to resist. For example, myself, I preferred to do everything myself on site. And now everyone is just so much more used about doing things remotely. If we are going to maintain remote relations, how are we going to provide data of quality for example, a physician to carry out a diagnosis? Thermography has been in existence for so many years, but now we have a different application of technology. This is something that has changed. And this is great to see initiatives such as Predikta and others to start doing it here in Brazil. As Alexandre pointed out, there are a number of initiatives all over, but we have here now the largest database of images related to PCR for a viral or flu-like syndromes. And we are going to get great results from it. Also, the need of having it available. Thermography used to be an expensive technology because of the material and the instrument involved. And today, we have that for the reality of the patient. And it has an impact on what Marco has said. As you have more information about the patient from all different sources in one single place, it is available for a multidisciplinary group that's going to provide support to the patient. It's no longer just patient-physician, but it's a group of people monitoring and concerned about the well-being of patients. Patients start their own data, and we talk a lot about self-collection for data. So we send a kit, and then the patient just do that. There are a number of apps that help patients monitor that. And this is something that can also personalize medicine. So November, the month of prostate cancer. As of specific age, the examination should be done annually. But we know that people can make their own decisions. If we have all these tools available, why don't we start monitoring it earlier? Realizing that each individual have different characteristics and that goes from people to people. Some projects were very challenging during the pandemic, thinking about the indigenous populations. We really worked hard to try to get PCR to them. So let's get a thermocycler that works with power energy. It was hard to really bring quality of diagnosis for indigenous populations. Now think about thermography and telemedicine points. We can take that to any place. I think that this is an important legacy of the pandemic. Making everyone aware that technology have to develop faster and that medicine should be available to everyone. What do you think about that? What is going to be the next steps after the pandemic? And what do you expect to see in Brazil in terms of this development? Innovation is here to stay. It is fully popularized. Everybody knows what a PCR is in the subway. At least they think they know what it is. Information gets very fast. Of course, there is also fake news, but information gets there fast. But we have to increase precision, really focusing on prevention. Brazil tend to have some early detection, but prevention is now something that we started speaking now with technology, making more ads, and it's getting there. You've talked about accessibility of tests. I had experience of working in 2 projects in the Amazon for screening, and the level of index there is quite, of lesions there is very high. And there was no accessibility to cervical cancer tests and diagnosis there. Once we have accessibility and make the material get there, and then the material gets back faster, without really making the person change where he or she is really gratifying. And this is very interesting, and we can really understand what's going on with these people who are far away as well. So innovation is here to stay. We used to get information in North America, now we go to Asia, so the world is much closer by, and it's much easier to get access to things. When you simply use your mobile phone to make diagnosis of images through mobile phone, not a final diagnosis, but a preliminary analysis, this is extremely beneficial. It gives agility in diagnosis, in care, and this is really important. And the combination of technology is really important. The combination of all processes to get to a precise diagnosis. Something that we didn't use to see a lot in Brazil are companies. Companies are investing in science. They are reactivating the departments of research and development, because we used to buy ready, or healthcare professionals would do it anywhere else where the conditions were better. But this is changing. Now it is bringing much more robustness to what we do here. And this is something that has been a contribution of the pandemic. Let me try to correlate what you've said. Marco has talked about disease, for example, cervical cancer, breast cancer. Thermography exists for 70 years. The first one was published in the 70s with breast cancer. It was widely studied in the 80s, and then it was put aside. And we don't see thermography widely used in medicine because of these studies from the 80s. And what was the main problem that happened in the 80s? Americans, who we copy all the time, tried to replace mammogram, which is an anatomical radiological imaging test that observes the tissue of the body. They try to replace mammogram for thermography, which is functional. But as it was a less used known technology, it didn't work and it was simply put aside. After the Iraq war, with the cheap prices of the detector, now the Chinese could then bring down prices of thermal detectors, and then they got much more developed, and studies have bloomed again. And we cannot detect breast cancer through thermography. We are going to detect that through anatomy, of course, anatomy, pathological anatomy. But what we can identify are pre-tumor findings, are vascular. It's a new angiogenesis. And the formation of new vessels takes place before the tumor is formed. What we can see is not early detection, which is what mammogram does. Mammogram detects a nodule that will biopsy, and it proves to be positive or negative. This is what we use for current detection. There are others, ultrasound, MRI. What thermography shows is abnormalities in vascularization. We see a risk marker, which is non-invasive, and through digital imaging. Some other areas where thermography is widely used, is in pain. We can prevent musculoskeletal disease, osteoarticular lesions in athletes using algorithms. So a soccer player, for example, before and after practice, and this is available in most soccer teams, they have a thermography before the practice or the game, and the algorithm compares images and presents a risk marker for subclinical infections. That's going to be incredibly more accessible. There are some thermal cameras also in mobile phones. So in future years, people will have access to thermography in their homes. I do that for some patients for upper airway infections. We can see rhinitis, sinusitis, tonsillitis, which can be simply added to your mobile phone, and you can send that to the healthcare professional, and the person can just see it from a distance. This is the reality. You've talked about the remote population, the indigenous population. We are running a project with the Xingu group where we are taking thermal devices such as this to address tendinopathy, because the indigenous populations have this kind of repeated activity. And we want to take the same device and bring in other algorithms to identify, let's say, a flu-like syndrome or COVID, and take them to undergo molecular tests, where we would have to be additional concerned about how they would be tested. Well, I think that's what I had to share with you. Just as a segue, thermography, if it replaces some of the invasive, I'm sorry, he's breaking up. Who has access to that as a patient? You have told us something about the possibilities, but I know a lot has been done. Well, the idea is not to replace. The idea is to combine, to bring together I'm comparing radiological methods and thermography. But we can also compare molecular methods and thermography. And that's exactly what we did during the pandemic. If we worked as part of a combination, we'll be much more successful. When we bring together an ultrasound or with thermography, we can enhance specificity. We improve negative predictive value, positive predictive value. It's a precise diagnosis. We are not going to repeat the same mistakes from the 80s of replacement, but rather combination of methods. For example, what did we do with molecular method as opposed to thermography? Rather than testing everyone, which is what's done in China, if they detect one case, they close Disneyland and they test the 35,000. We could go everyone into a thermal imaging. It's a JPEG, very affordable, and suspected cases would be tested. There would be about 5% of cases with 80% sensitivity to COVID, which is our track record for COVID specifically. Thermography is available in all states of Brazil and some states in some countries in Latin America. There are clinics and hospitals with these thermal devices that can perform full body thermography and breast thermography for diagnosis and also for monitoring purposes. Well, I guess we have got to our time. I know there is just so much to say, but I would like to thank you all. Thank Marco, thank Alexandre for your participation. We still have a lot to do, and I think we can talk about that further in the future. It was wonderful to have you as my partners. We've been developing things in Brazil. We have always imported things, right? And I think it was high time we could customize that to our reality. So thank you very much. Initiative, FIS initiative, for this opportunity to exchange our opinions. And thank you all for watching. If you have questions and want to send to FIS, we'd be glad to respond then remotely. Thank you very much. Have a great day.